Hello, everybody. My name is Marsh, and this is a review for the second episode of House of the Dragon. Let's get into it. So, House of the Dragon episode 2. We're not really going to have any unspoiler stuff for it. It's all going to be spoilers for the most part because for me, when it comes to a series, I'll be spoiler free for the first episode, but after that, then it's honestly on you if you keep watching and expect no spoilers after that. So, episode 2. Episode 2 is basically the House of the Dragon version of The Bachelor in a way. It's about Viserion trying to find a new wife because it's his duty to the realm to find a wife so that his line doesn't go away and disappear if anything were to happen to them. The only issue with that primarily is the person he announced as heir, his daughter. If he is to have a son with another person that he has a wife with, then she would no longer be the heir to the throne. And so it's about dealing with the conflict between him and his daughter, dealing with the conflict between should he marry, and if so, who should he marry, and also dealing with the conflict of his brother Daemon, who is trying to start a civil war, essentially. And so it does a pretty good job at tackling all of this, to be honest, and I thought it was actually a better episode than the first one, in my opinion, just because the first one was setting everything up, and this one is starting to get the wheels moving and all that political maneuvering and everything like that. We didn't have as much like explanation. We don't need to find out who the characters are and things like that. So episode 2 ran a little smoother when it came to everything. And so I'm just going to go through it piece by piece with the story first. I'll talk about any like visual stuff or anything that like bothered me primarily in the episode later. But we'll just start with the story first. And it starts with Viserion essentially talking with his council, and then the Valyrian man comes in, and he's disgruntled and upset because all of his ships are being destroyed by the crab people. I don't remember their name, but they basically feed the sailors to crabs, as they showed in the episode, and so he wants to do something about it. And the king is basically like not doing anything at all. He's like, oh, I sent a few envoys and blah blah blah. And obviously, Valerion's getting even more disgruntled, and so they're setting him up to basically be a second antagonist with Daemon, essentially. And so they keep going along with that, and then during that council meeting where he brought that up, his daughter actually speaks up and says, why don't we do a show of force and bring the dragons out? We could destroy them, not necessarily start war, but it's more of a show of force. And of course, they all just like laugh at her and look down on her because that's like the political viewpoint at the time. They don't want the woman to speak when it comes to that point or that era in time, and so they send her off instead to pick the Kingsguard, or which knight is going to be the next Kingsguard. She chooses the one that has the only combat experience out of them all, which obviously is a bad choice in the opinion of the Hand of the King, Otto, because he isn't a high house. He's just a soldier. But obviously, if you're the king and you want someone protecting you, do you want someone who can fight, or you just want some pretty boy? And so she made the right choice, and the king proves that. But obviously, Otto is always like trying to political maneuver, as we've seen only in 2 episodes, and he's not very like good at it. He's like sort of the antagonist when it comes to the central King's Landing. Like, he is the one that I wouldn't be surprised stabs the king in the back one day, or as we learn later in the episode, he's already like doing his little plots, which we'll get into. But they go on through the episode, and then the king basically gets offered a proposal from the Valyrian man, and he says, I want you to wed my daughter, and this way our 2 houses can combine. The Valyrians, who have been there just as long as the Targaryens, we controlled the seas, we're one of the richest houses, and the Targaryens, who rule the kingdom, will be the 2 most powerful houses, will recombine just like in the old times, and we'll have an heir and everything like that. The only issue when it comes to that is when he actually meets the daughter, she's 12 years old. And thank God they actually like didn't make him want to marry her and be like a total creep and disgusting person. Obviously, like back in medieval times, there's a lot of like kings and things that would do that and not have a problem with it. They're a bunch of weirdos and creeps, but they actually made Viserion kind of a good person in a way because they don't want him to be that weirdo and creep. And he's like, no, I can't do that. And then he even asked the girl at one point, he's like, what does your mother say about this, not your father? And she's like, she says I won't have to bed you until I'm 14. And it's like, oh, that's so gross. It's so disgusting. And even Otto thinks it's disgusting as well. The only thing with that is he knows it's the smartest politically for a marriage because of all the things that it can bring, but it's not like morally ethical in his mind, and he knows that. But another issue comes into play because he doesn't have that much time left. It's not known to the public, but he is slowly dying. If you look at his hand, he was like rotting on his hand, and they had to put maggots on it to eat the rotten flesh, which is something they did in medieval times as well. It's not like out of the ordinary, but he was getting treated for that. And basically, he's slowly dying. The first episode, he was getting treated on his back for a wound as well. And he doesn't let anyone know this outside of like the Hand of the King. And basically, him and the Maester are the only ones that know that he's dying. And one thing my friend pointed out, is it real? I don't know. But Daemon was sitting on the throne the same day that he pricked his finger on the throne. Because when he was sitting on the throne, he met Rhaenyra. He's like, oh, what if you put poison on the throne? Because when he's sending him off, he pricked his finger. And he could have poisoned him because he believes he's the true heir to the throne, essentially. And so if he's the true heir, it goes to him if he dies. And so it could be poison. I don't know if it's that complex. It could just be like an infection from the cut. But that's an interesting thing to look at for the future. We'll take note and keep an eye on it. Anyways, they keep going on with the betrothals and all that stuff. And then his other choice of someone to wed is the daughter of the Hand of the King. I don't remember her name exactly. I think it's like Allison or something. Alice something. I'll put it up here. I'm just going to refer to her as Lady Hightower for now. And so Lady Hightower is doing her seducing job that her father wants her to do. She did it in a different way, a more wholesome way at least. She didn't just like come into his room when he was like grieving for his wife and be like, oh, here's my titties, let's have sex. She at least like went in, talked about history, and is befriending him and making him actually like fall in love with her, as we see. And then she does that like when he's showing her the little dragon, they drop it, break it, she mends it, brings it back. So she's like seducing him, but like in a friendly way, and trying to make him actually fall for her instead of just like being like a sexual seduction. So that's an interesting take. And I don't think she really wanted to seduce him anyways. I think she's kind of hoping that he chooses someone else, but he doesn't really have a choice in choosing someone else, or at least in his mind he doesn't have a choice because he's falling for her. But she wants him to like choose someone else. She doesn't really want to do it. It's all her father pressuring her, as you see in that one scene where he's like holding her hands, and you could tell it's stressful on her. She's like ripping her nails off in her skin. Basically, they have to decide between those two. But before all of that happens, there's an interruption with Daemon. Daemon comes and he steals one of the dragon eggs, and it was the dragon egg that was supposed to go into the cradle of Balon, his son that was born for an hour and then died. And so basically Daemon is declaring civil war in a way. He says, I found a wife, I'm marrying her. This is a Targaryen tradition for the king to put an egg in the cradle of their son. And so he's saying that, one, he has a wife, he's marrying her, he's having a son. Two, he's the true king and the true heir because he's following the Targaryen traditions. And then three, I don't know, he's just doing something. But basically they have a little conflict at Dragonstone, which he's taken over, and he's talking about always ruling the throne on Dragonstone, and it's like a sign of disrespect, and they need to do something about it. But they have a conflict on Dragonstone. He's talking to Otto Hightower. They're about to get in a fight, and the conflict and like the remediations and problem solving of the Hightower dude is not very good. Rhaenyra shows up surprisingly on her dragon, and so you have the two opposing dragons, which is like a stalemate, so that they can't fight that way. And then she's basically like, yo, I'm here right now. You gonna kill me? Then do it. Do it. And he's like, whatever. And he like bluffs. He throws his egg away. And then we find out he doesn't even have a kid. He's not even planning to marry the one lady. He just said all of that to cause issues and to cause a civil war basically in trouble. And it's obvious there's going to be a civil war as well. That's just where it's leading to, especially with what happens at the end of the episode. But after that, they have a council and everything. And I'm skipping over some stuff, I'm making it brief, but they have a council, and he's saying, I have chosen a wife. And the Valerian man's there. He thinks it's his daughter that he's going to choose, but then he looks over at the Lady Hightower, and he's like, I've chosen Lady Hightower. So he chose love out of his heart and who he truly loves. And I think part of the reasoning behind his choice as well is he's dying. He doesn't have time to wait for the Valerian girl to age to where he can actually have a child with her. That'd be a minimum of like 2 years at least. And so he chooses her because she's older. He actually has feelings for her, and they can have a child right away. Now, the way they set it up is kind of interesting because they make it seem like the horrible, worst, bad choice is to be with the Valerian girl. And so they make it seem like you're rooting for the Hightower girl to actually like be the wife out of everyone else, even though that's the total wrong choice for him to make politically. Even the person he calls in to have an opinion, he's like, politically, and I mean politically, not morally or ethically, politically the right choice is the Valerian girl, even though he doesn't like it. But he chooses her, the Hightower girl. And it's like, no matter what, the choices are bad. There's different things. You have one that's morally bad, you have one that's politically bad. And so he goes for the politically bad one with the Hightower girl. So no matter what, he was setting himself up for failure. It's just a different way. It's like, do you want to be looked at as like a pedophile who's with a 12-year-old, or do you want to be looked at as someone who just chose for love, basically, and like cause civil war, as we're going to see pretty soon? Because what happens? Because he chose the Hightower girl, the Valerian dude goes over to see Daemon, and now he has an alliance with Daemon, and the civil war is going to be starting. And it's either way, it was a lose-lose for the king. You be looked at as a pedophile, or you be looked at as not a pedophile, but you cause a civil war. So there was really no situation for him to win. Maybe if he just seceded and gave the throne to Rhaenyra, that might be a win, except then there's no line. But that's the other thing as well. People don't want her to rule. They don't want to take her word, and that's why so many people are forcing him to try to find a wife, because they don't want a woman on the throne. That's where that ends. We have a political uprising with Daemon, so we know there's going to be a civil war, and that's sort of where they leave off the episode, as well as like the weird crab people, which I don't know if they have that one disease. I think it's called the grayscale from Game of Thrones. I don't know if that's what they had. It looked kind of like it, but we'll find out more about them, I assume. But yeah, it was a really good overall story and political maneuvering with the choices they made. I always enjoy when something's a little more morally gray. There's no obvious choice, and nothing is like the obvious right thing to do. There's always going to be a punishment for what choice they make. In this case, Viserion choosing Lady Hightower. So really no complaints with the story this episode. There were a few moments where like the dialogue was just like, but it was more like, I don't know. It was just very brief moments. I can't even point it out. I think it was when the king was speaking for the most part, because some of the parts were just like a little like cringy, but that's just more dialogue and getting used to it again, because I haven't watched like an old time fantasy show like we have in a while. The visuals overall were really good though. I mean, the dragons are still not as good as Game of Thrones, but that's to be expected since they only had those dragons for a few episodes, and so they put their whole budget into it, versus these ones are going to show up every episode, I'm assuming, and we're going to have to see them every episode. And so yeah, the visuals were good, the story was good, the pacing was good, honestly. This was a way better episode than the first one. I would probably give this one an 8.5 out of 10, maybe even a 9. It's kind of a hard scale to go on, because I feel like when you're judging Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, it puts itself to a higher standard, so you don't want to give anything a 10. You don't want to give anything high scores, because you're thinking like Game of Thrones at its peak when you're grading it. If you're talking about regular television and the normal stuff you find on like Netflix, then this is like a 10 compared to that right now, at least. But I'll give it a 9 right now for this episode. We'll see how it goes, how it keeps building, but I'm excited to see this Civil War and what they do with it. And it feels good to have Game of Thrones back in a way and have it not be total trash like the last season. At least for some people, that's what they thought. But yeah, tell me what you thought of the episode. Did you not like any of it? What do you think about the choice between the Valerian girl and Lady Hightower? Obviously, the more ethical choice is Lady Hightower, because he's going for love and everything, but then you have the repercussions of civil war. And the more politically right choice would be the other girl, even though it's morally not right and ethically not right. But yeah, tell me what you thought. And if you have any predictions for the future, go ahead and shoot those in the comments as well. And if you could leave a like and subscribe, that'd be much appreciated. Thank you for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.